So glad so many of you could make it. We have a tremendous opportunity today to have Marion Nestle talk to us. Bill Clark will introduce her in more detail. I am John Haig. I am the co-director of the Mosavar Rahmani Center for Business and Government, and we feel extremely fortunate that we can sponsor this lunch seminar. With that, obviously our center focuses on issues at the intersection of business and government. That does not rule out too many topics, but we try to maintain some focus. But we're very fortunate to have Marion with us. I'm going to hand it over to Bill Clark, who will lead and moderate the discussion today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Center for Business and Government. I'm Bill Clark. I'm a research professor here at the school and do things relating to food. Before I introduce our guest for today, I simply want to call your attention to the announcement here. Radcliffe Institute is putting on what just shows likelihood of being an incredibly exciting couple of days. Mac DeVivo is here.
Yeah, I'm Mac DeVivo representing Radcliffe, and this is our marquee event for the science. Oh,
no. Marquee event for the year. That's all we're saying. This is the PR. We'll put it up at the end as well, but you can find it everywhere on the Radcliffe website and so forth. Okay, so with that, let me then proceed to the business of the day, which is to welcome to us Marion Nestle. Marion is the, I thought I had a good title. She has the ultimate title. She is the Paulette Goddard Professor, and it's that Paulette Goddard Professor in the Department of Nutrition and Food Studies at NYU, capping a career in which she has done stints as a professor of biology at Brandeis, a professor of family and community medicine at UC San Francisco, 2 years with the US federal government and the Department of Health and Human Services, and much more, but that would be me spending all the time telling you about her. So just a quick overview on Marion's amazing career. Topics in which she has made and is making now, continues to make fundamental contributions, range from the basic science of food safety, good nutrition and malnutrition, through topic of today's talk, the politics and interests behind our dismal performance as a society in turning that scientific knowledge into better food systems that work for everyone. And finally, a topic of, I think, special relevance here at this university. She has written and researched extensively on the obstacles to linking scholarship more effectively to practice in our food systems that are created by the pervasive conflicts of interest in sponsored research and public messaging on food and nutrition issues. You will see parts of that in her presentation. You will see parts of it in her books. Her contributions are too many to keep up with. She has, I think, more than a dozen books, of which we have several here, countless articles, both scholarly and popular, and just a remarkable daily blog called Food Politics that I think started back in 2007, as I remember, with an essay on the origins of food revolutions, running through recent posts on things like USDA's, which she calls quite impressive recent work on school lunches, to food politics of Barbie, like, sure. Can you imagine this? Today's blog entry. She's here giving a talk at Harvard on the road. Today's blog entry, which is a long reflection on insects as food. Okay, so in short, Marion Nestle is the reigning rock star of food science and politics. There's just no other way to put it, which is why we're so delighted to have us with her here today, here and on the webcast of this show that is being put out by the Center for Business and Government, to present and discuss her thoughts on Food Politics 2023, what matters and why. So Marion, the floor is yours until you hand it back to me to moderate the Q&A that we'll try to have a little bit of time for before the festivities close off sharply at 1:15. Welcome to you, but join me in welcoming Marion to the stage.
I'm wired.
I think I'm wired. Thank you, Bill, for that very nice introduction. You forgot to mention that I'm retired. You forgot that. I need to see the slides. How am I going to do that? I'll stand over here. Is that okay? No. You're all right on the distance stuff? But I need to see, this is not going to work. Can I have one of these so it's turned around so I can see it?
Or we can also move the podium.
Let's move the podium. I'm not sure I need it.
Anyway,
Anyway, well, I want to be able to see the slides because otherwise I can't talk.
you do that like this.
Yeah, that'll work. No. Should have thought of that before. Anyway, hello, everybody. And thank you all for coming. This is really nice. I'm excited to be here. I write books about food politics. That's what's up here. And but my latest book is a memoir. And the memoir was a pandemic project. I wrote it because I was stuck up in Ithaca, New York, and I didn't have anything to do for months and months and months. And I couldn't get into my office and I couldn't get into research materials. I thought it was time to reflect on the kinds of questions that I get asked all the time. And I think the memoir, which is now out, has something to say about the effects of childhood on adult behavior, and it answers a lot of questions about why I do what I do and how I came to do it. The important thing to understand about a memoir is it's not a biography. A biography is about facts, checkable facts. A memoir is about how you think about those facts. And I refer to it as my first work of fiction. I'm not sure I can really back up everything that I say in it. Most of my books are very, very carefully referenced because I write about very political issues. I'm extraordinarily careful, or I should say, I try to be extraordinarily careful about documenting the facts that I have in my books, about setting up a very detailed documentary evidence for the opinions that I have. And I try to do the best I possibly can on that. The book I'm best known for, I think, is Food Politics, which has been out in 3 editions, the most recent one in 2013. I don't think there's going to be another one. The question that I got asked when Food Politics came out was, what does food have to do with politics? And it was a genuine question. And I want to just go back for a minute. The person who designed the cover designed 2 different typefaces for food and politics, and did that deliberately to demonstrate the disconnect in people's thinking about food and politics. But I think that for many of us, food is an extremely personal issue. It has to do with what we put in our bodies. It has to do with what we like, what our culture suggests that we eat. But it's also very political in the sense that it has to do with social status, wealth, and power. And it's that dichotomy, the connection between the personal and the political, that I find so interesting and that I've tried to study as best I could. Just to give one example, the issue of what to eat is something that just really troubles people. People don't understand what they're supposed to eat. They feel like food is very confusing. Nutritionists are changing their minds all the time about what's important. And I think that's really too bad, because I think nutrition advice is so simple that the journalist Michael Pollan can brilliantly do it in 7 words: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And from my standpoint, as somebody who's worked in nutrition for a long time, this takes care of it with only one modification, and that is to define what food is. And I'll talk about that later. But when I go online and ask the question, what influences choices of food, I get diagrams like this. And if you can't see the slides and want to, just move up. I don't mind. This slide has on it everything that you can possibly think of. It's got culture, it's got religion, it's got money, it's got various kinds of social factors, peer pressure. The one thing that it doesn't have is what I consider to be the elephant in the room, which is the influence of the food industry on what we eat, as if the food industry has no influence, as if it just simply doesn't exist. And so what I've tried to do in my work is to just change the balance a little bit, change the balance so that instead of focusing on all those other factors, all of which are very important, I focus on the role of the food industry. So bear with me on that one. And by food industry, I'm mainly talking about the consolidated corporations that produce the foods we love, that take up 70% of the supermarket, that are brand names that we adore, that we don't want taken away from us. We love to eat their products. That's who I'm mostly talking about. And I want to say about food companies, something that I've said over and over and over again. Food companies are not social service agencies. They are not public health agencies. They are businesses with stockholders to please. And starting in the early 1980s, Wall Street adopted Jack Welch's proposal and Milton Friedman's proposal that the main purpose of a corporation was to make money for its stockholders, never mind social values or anything else that might take away from bottom lines. And I think once you understand that this is the way business works, whether business wants to work this way or not, this is the way business works. Once you understand it, that a lot of what else goes on makes perfect sense. Because there's a lot of pressure on food companies. Pressure from advocates like me who want them to stop marketing junk foods to kids, pressure from regulators who want to regulate them, pressures from lawyers who want to sue them, and most of all from stockholders that simply want more money for themselves and want it faster. And food companies initially, when obesity became an issue, went through all the stages of death and denial. First, they denied that they had anything to do with it. They said it was up to personal responsibility. We're not holding guns up to your head, forcing you to eat our products. It's your personal choice. Then they started reformulating products, and then they started fighting back. And it's the fighting back that I'm particularly interested in these days, because the fighting back has taken the form of what is referred to as the food industry playbook. And this playbook, which the tobacco industry developed to a fine art form, involved, first of all, casting doubt on the science. All you have to do is cast doubt on the science and you've got it made. They blamed personal responsibility. They urged self-regulation. Don't regulate us, we'll take care of ourselves. They created front groups and partnerships that would do that work for them. They bought favorable science by funding their own research. And they insisted on having a seat at the policy table. You cannot make policy about food without having food companies at the table. How many times have you heard that one? And then when that didn't fail, when that didn't work, they lobby and litigate. And they have done that greatly with great success. The tobacco industry, of course, set the tone for all of that. And food is not tobacco. I'm not saying in any way that it is. Tobacco is simple. One product, one message, don't smoke. Food obviously is more complicated because we have to eat to live. But the tobacco industry defined the way in which the politics of this worked in a way where they denied and challenged, obscured, undermined, lobbied, and complicated. And the food industry has adopted that word for word, as have many other industries. And I want to give just one example, a recent one. It may be that the new obesity drugs are the miracle for solving the problem of obesity. That's quite possible. But as The Guardian pointed out, the experts who argued in favor of these drugs were all paid off by the drug company, which made 3,500 payments of nearly 22 million pounds to obesity charities, the National Health Service Trust in Great Britain, doctors, health educators, and lobbyists. So $22 million. They got their money's worth on that. So that's just one example. Every Monday on my blog, foodpolitics.com, I've been doing this for years, I post some example of industry funding of research, each one more hilarious than the next. I try to pick the funniest ones I can find. Here's one: Mediterranean diet supplemented with dairy foods improves markers of cardiovascular risk. Guess who paid for it? In this case, it was the Australian dairy industry. Here's another one: the effect of cocoa flavanol supplementation for the prevention of cardiovascular disease, paid for by Mars, which makes cocoa flavanol supplements. They used to try to sell the chocolate as but the FDA got upset about that. So those are just examples of it. Here's another one. This is a European example. Nutri-Score is a front of package labeling scheme that's been proposed by somebody in France, and a study of opposition to this labeling scheme found that a study is 21 times more likely to find unfavorable results from using this scheme if the authors declared a conflict of interest or were funded by a food company. So the industry influences research. And this playbook, which is used by the industry, is not only done by tobacco, it's done by pharmaceutical drugs, it's done by the fossil fuel industry, the chemical industry, and then my interest, of course, was in copycat food and beverage. I just did for this what Naomi did for everything else. And it also includes the alcohol industry. So this is the kind of climate that we're in. And so with that background, let me turn to what I think are the really important public health nutrition problems, what I think are the really important global food system problems in the world today. And there are three, and that is hunger and malnutrition, billions of people who don't have enough to eat on a daily basis, obesity and the chronic diseases for which it is a risk factor, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and so forth. The environmental effects of the way we produce and consume food, which are enormous, right up there with transportation. And then the COVID-19 pandemic, which put a lot of this in focus in a way that it hadn't been in focus before. So let me talk first about what I mean by food system. I'm talking to the converted here, I hope, but what I mean by food system is everything that happens to a food from the time it's produced, transported, taken to a grocery store, purchased, fixed, eaten, and then wasted. It's everything that happens to it. And the importance of food systems thinking is that it's very, very difficult to discuss any one part of that without talking about all the other parts, because they are they're so intimately connected. And I'll try to explain that a little bit more. What we're facing these days is a sharp drop in life expectancy. This is a national phenomenon. I live in New York, so I'm particularly interested in the drop in life expectancy in New York population, where it's very clear that there's a drop in life expectancy across the board, but it's much worse for people of color. And that brings us right, and the cause of that, of course, has to do with not only COVID-19, although that was a big part of it, but also with opioid drugs, guns, and other factors in society. And I'm showing that because I want to point out how food is intimately connected to social and behavioral determinants of health. The social and determinants of the COVID-19, a bad outcome from COVID-19, were exactly the same social determinants that promote obesity, that promote chronic diseases. And these include racial and ethnic discrimination, lack of income, lack of education, living in poor neighborhoods, all of the inequalities in our society, not only promote obesity, promote the chronic diseases for which obesity is a risk factor, but also promoted bad outcome from COVID-19. These things are inextricably linked. That's food systems thinking. And I, of course, am interested in the food aspects of that. So my focus is on food. And I want to talk about what I think are the three really important innovations, changes that have occurred in thinking about nutrition just within the last 10 years. And this has to do with food systems, with what are called triple duty diets and ultra processed foods. And I want to talk about each of those. So let me just say one more thing about food systems, or a couple more things. This is my favorite food system slide. It's a slide of what happens to America's corn production. America's corn production in 2020 has roughly 45% of it goes as feed for animals. 45% of it goes as fuel for automobiles. Get your head around that one. I can't. And that leaves a tiny little fraction way up at the top as food for people. You can argue about how much of that is high fructose corn syrup, very little of it, but there is so little corn that goes as food for people that what we have is a food system that's designed to fuel automobiles, think about that one, and feed and animals, which of course, one of the dietary approaches is to try to eat fewer animals, not more. So that's our food system. It is also a food system that is based on low-wage work. And there are long historical reasons for that. The food system is on the backs of farmers, fishermen, agricultural workers, and I would add grocery workers to that cartoon, as we saw during the pandemic when they were essential workers who had to work. And we saw that during the pandemic, making these things absolutely visible in a way they had never been visible before. When President Trump insisted that meatpacking workers stay on the job, even though they were getting sick and dying. And his executive order was written by Tyson's Foods. That came out afterwards. That Tyson's had written the executive order that President Trump signed. I think this is, again, one of my favorite slides. This is Jose Andres, the celebrity chef, who is somewhat of an American hero. And he posted this tweet, X. I don't know how to talk about it, but in any case, the two pictures, the one on the left was an enormous mountain of potatoes that was being destroyed because there was no distribution system that would allow those potatoes to get from the fields into the stores. At the same time, that enormous numbers of cars were lined up in San Antonio waiting for handouts at a food bank. One of the great ironies of what happened during the pandemic. And so the root causes of this, I and lots of other people have talked about, and that has to do with an economic system in which profit takes precedent over all other values in society. A food-driven system driven to maximize profits that does not take values of community, values of workers, and values of other people into consideration because it can't, it's not allowed to. Okay, so that's the food system part. Let me talk about triple duty policies. This term, the first time I had ever seen it, came out of a report, two reports in the Lancet in 2019, one of which was chaired, the Lancet report was chaired by Walter Willett, who's here. I don't think he's in this room, but he's here at Harvard. Anyway, these two reports came out within a week of each other, just before the pandemic in January 2019, or year before. And they're very big reports. They're 50 pages of very tiny type, very densely written, really a slog to go through, totally worth the effort, in my view. Two very important reports taking a food system approach to three kinds of policies. Policies to prevent undernutrition, policies to prevent overnutrition, and policies to prevent climate change. The triple duty part was to design a diet that would address all three at once. That was its purpose. So let me start with the Lancet report. It was the one that got the most attention. And it asked a question, how are we going to feed a burgeoning population that's supposed to reach 10 billion people within some number of years and keep within planetary boundaries, keep the diet without making climate change worse? That was the question that they asked. And the answer that they came up with was the planetary health diet, which they said would require people in developed countries, industrialized countries, to eat half as much meat and twice as many vegetables. In other words, to replace meat in the diet with plant foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, in that way. A big change in the diet, really big change. And part of the reason for that was the influence of meat on health, but by far the major reason was because of the influence of animal raising, particularly beef cattle, on climate change. And this is the classic example of that, showing the relationship of various foods in the diet to greenhouse gas emissions, with beef cattle way, way at the top by a large margin. So the planetary health diet suggested eating fewer animal foods and replacing them with plant-based foods to the extent possible, because the plant foods have a much smaller climate impact. And the triple duty came in. They had these cartoons, reduce red meat consumption, and that would give you healthier diets to prevent cancer and other kinds of problems. You would have more land for efficient agriculture and lower greenhouse gas emissions. This kind of diet would do triple duty. It would solve 3 problems at once. The meat industry didn't like it. A surprise. Lots of other people didn't like it too, but I'll just stick with the meat industry on this one. They didn't like it. Fundamental lack of agricultural understanding, radical, irresponsible, the usual kinds of things. The report got an enormous amount of negative publicity in that following week. Because of that negative publicity, I think in part, this report got completely ignored. And this report, in some ways, the second report, was in some ways, I think, much more important because it dealt with the politics. The report is called the global syndemic. That's another problem with it. What's that? A syndemic is an anthropological term that means a collection of epidemics. But it too took a food systems approach to dealing with hunger, obesity, and chronic diseases, and climate change. And I thought its analysis was particularly worth looking at. It rooted the problems of hunger, obesity, and climate change in what they called consumptogenic economic systems. I suppose that's a euphemism for capitalism. But they were talking about systems that prioritize corporate economic power, that give a lot of credence and priority to corporations, that promote the privatization of what used to be public goods, and that externalize the health and environmental costs of food production and consumption, and that neglect the risks of giving corporations that much power. They went on to say that we live in an era of policy inertia. We have policy that doesn't budge on these questions. And the reasons for that in their analysis was, first of all, weak governance, governments that have been captured by corporations, powerful food industry opposition, and very weak civil demand. The people are not going to the streets and demanding a healthier food system. They called for a transformative social movement to fix that. That was their call. And I thought that was pretty impressive. I never read that in the Lancet before. I don't know about anybody else, but this is the first time I had seen that in a medical journal of that stature, to have something like that in there. I thought it was really impressive. And more than that, they established a roadmap for food industry regulation. And their roadmap included such things as stopping subsidies for corporations, stopping tax breaks for corporations, making them reveal conflicts of interest, stopping them marketing to children, just full stop. Requiring corporations to pay the externalized costs, health and environmental, keeping corporations out of public policy, making them disclose their political donations and where they were putting their money, and then holding companies accountable for the damage that they were causing. As you can imagine, nobody paid any attention to this. They had another cartoon. If you restrict commercial influences, you will reduce opposition to policies that would be otherwise possible for reducing hunger, addressing chronic disease, and reducing climate change. And they even called for a framework convention on food systems that would have the same kind of United Nations weight and power as the Framework Convention on Children or the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Very, very important report. I think badly neglected. Everybody should read it. Okay, let's go on to my third recent issue, which is ultra-processed foods, which you will see is very closely connected to all of this. Ultra-processed foods are those foods which have been connected by an enormous amount of research now to a poor health outcome. So let's talk about ultra-processed foods. It's a new concept, can date it precisely to 2009, when Carlos Monteiro, who's a professor at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, and colleagues came up with the idea that certain categories of junk foods were particularly harmful. And they did a definition. The issue is not food or nutrients, the problem is processing. And they came up with what they called the NOVA classification. I complained about global syndemic. I don't think it was a helpful term. I don't think NOVA classification is helpful because it has no meaning whatsoever. It's just a name. But the NOVA classification divides, what it does is amazing. It divides foods into 4 categories. It divides foods into fresh and minimally processed foods, processed food ingredients like salt, sugar, fat, processed foods that have been canned or frozen or something like that. And those are food. Minimally processed foods are food, culinary ingredients are food, processed foods are food. Then we have ultra-processed foods, which is a separate category. And that category they defined as industrially transformed, bearing no resemblance to the foods from which they were derived. You can't tell by looking at them what they came from or how they were made. They were deliberately designed to replace the foods that they're made from. They have lots of additives, color, flavor, and texture additives. An operating definition that I think works really, really well for them, because sometimes the definition seems confusing, is if you can't make it in your home kitchen, it's ultra processed. If you can make it in your home kitchen, it is not ultra processed, even if it has a lot of sugar, salt, and fat added to it. So that homemade ice cream, not ultra processed. Ice cream that has color, flavor, texture additives, ultra processed. So the importance of this, I mean, it's sort of easy to tell what the difference is. This is the classic slide on how you tell the difference. Corn on the cob is minimally processed. Canned corn is processed, even though it's got salt added. And the Doritos are ultra processed. You can't make them in your home kitchen. They're not reproducible because you don't have the ingredients and you don't have the machinery. Carlos Monteiro has counted more than 1,600 papers that use the word ultra processed in their titles since 2009. 1,600. Actually, he had an exponential equation on this showing that it was exponential, but I took it off. I didn't think you needed to see that. These papers have been subjected to all kinds of meta-analyses, and there are now, I think, dozens of meta-analyses, but this is a slide from 2020. The meta-analyses all show the same thing. They all show that ultra-processed foods are correlated, associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, certain kinds of cancers, bad outcome from COVID-19, overall mortality, any bad thing you can think of correlates with consumption of ultra-processed foods. And despite that, 21st century capitalism loves them. Why? Because they're easy to store. You can buy the ingredients when they're cheap and stick them on a shelf for a long time. They have an aura of modernism and Westernism so that you can sell them all over the world. And people will love them. They don't cost very much relatively. They're enormously profitable. They're unicorns, many of them, billion-dollar sellers, and in quotation marks, addictive. It's in quotation marks because I find myself very uncomfortable using the word addiction to refer to food because we have to eat to live. But the addiction thing has been done by Michael Moss in his books, Salt, Sugar, Fat, and Hooked, in which he is making a very strong case for the addictive or semi-addictive or dopamine elucidating characteristics of these foods, which are deliberately formulated to be irresistibly delicious. You got these things in front of you, you cannot eat just one, as Bert Lahr said years and years and years ago. So deliberately formulated to be irresistibly delicious. And now we can prove it. Okay, only one study, a small clinical trial, but I like using hyperbole. I think this is the most important nutrition experiment done since vitamins. This is a hugely important study done at NIH by Kevin Hall and his colleagues who have access to a metabolic ward, which is a locked hotel, basically, completely locked, in which they can feed the people who come into it whatever they want to, examine everything that comes out. They can study everything they want. The subjects who are locked up in that place cannot cheat. They can't lie about what they're eating. They cannot go out and get a late night snack. It's controlled in a way that no other nutrition experiments can be controlled. And Kevin Hall did this study of ultra-processed foods because he did not believe that food processing would have any effect whatsoever on what people were eating. He thought the whole concept was ridiculous. He was able to study it because he had this facility, and he got 20 people to volunteer to be locked up in this place for a month. He paid them and got them to agree to be locked up for a month, fed them 2 weeks on a completely ultra-processed diet and 2 weeks on a completely other than ultra-processed diet, and had those diets formulated so the study subjects couldn't tell them apart. They didn't realize they were being given 2 different kinds of diets. But when they were on the ultra-processed diet, they ate an average of 500 calories a day more than they were eating when they were not on the ultra-processed diet. Now, I can't even explain to you how big 500 calories is on average. This is an average, so there were people who ate just a little more. There were people who had 1,000 calories a day more. 500 calories is enormous. If you're doing a dietary study and you're able to show a difference of 50 calories, you think you've gotten a miracle. You're really, you publish in the New England Journal of Medicine if you get a 50-calorie difference. He got 500. This is enormous. Well, so the immediate question arises, what is it about ultra-processed foods that's doing this? And that question is now being investigated. His first guess in the paper that was first published was that they were eating faster. That was the only thing they could find, besides the fact that they were eating bigger meals. They were eating a little bit faster. Their eating rate was higher on the ultra-processed than it was on the other. He didn't think that was enough to account for 500 calories. He also showed that the meals were larger, duh. They were eating more calories. Obviously, they were eating more. And he subsequently published papers that show that he can correlate in that study eating faster, energy density, which means calories per volume of food, and just that the foods were hyper palatable or addictive, if you prefer. Very, very, very important work, it seems to me, with a very clear message, an absolutely clear message. Which is to minimize ultra-processed foods, not stop them entirely because they're too delicious and people like them too much, but minimize them. Well, as you can imagine, this study did not win any popularity contests. The Grain Chain, an industry-funded trade association, said processing is good for you. We like processed foods. They're good to eat. There's no accepted definition for ultra-processed foods. It's not evidence-based. We can decide whether what was evidence or not. And it ignores nutrients. Just because a food has nutrients means it's good. If a food has nutrients, it's good. So they were opposed to it. The Food and Drink Association of Europe wrote a position paper on it. It's illogical, unscientific, confusing. It threatens traditional foods and it undermines public health because you're not eating nutritious foods foods that have nutrients in them. So that's okay. What really concerns me is my nutrition colleagues who think that this is not such a great thing. And here's a study, ultra-processed foods and obesity risk, a critical review. Because avoidance of ultra-processed foods could be potentially adverse. You wouldn't be eating nutrients that you needed. You shouldn't make recommendations regarding their role in diets before causality is firmly established. Okay, the author had a certain number of conflicts of interest with food companies, but even besides of that, I think there was only one author on that. The rest of them all signed on too. I'm worried about my nutrition colleagues these days. I'm worried about the direction of nutrition, which is very much in the direction of precision nutrition. Food is medicine. These are all approaches that are valuable for individuals. They're very personal. They put the burden of dealing with food systems on personal choice. Precision diets or personalized diets for individuals based on their genetic makeup. I consider that the antithesis of public health, and I'm a public health person, guilty as charged. So I'm very concerned about that direction. I'm a little bit worried about where it's going, and not nearly public healthy enough for my taste. And the reason for that has to do with the current public health environment, in which 70% of the adult population in the United States is overweight or obese. Not necessarily obese, but certainly overweight. 42% are considered obese. And that puts them at very higher than normal risk of diet-related chronic diseases. We have no national policies for dealing with chronic disease, none. As far as I can tell, and it is absolutely not a research priority. You want to know what the research priority is? It's precision nutrition and food is medicine. That's the research priority. So this concerns me a lot. Why is there no national program? Because we have captured government. We have a consumptogenic environment. We've got food industry opposition. If you're going to advise people to eat more healthfully, you're going to advise them not to eat ultra-processed foods, and that's not going to get you very far. So I get asked all the time, if I were the czarina of the food system, what would I do? And I thought I would tell you what I would do. I would limit election campaign funding. That would be the first thing I would do in favor of the healthy food systems. Let's limit the amount of money that candidates can spend on elections. Let's keep the amount equivalent across the board, fund it publicly, and keep money out of politics. I would require corporate social responsibility as part of what corporations are permitted to do and not do. I want Wall Street to evaluate corporations on real corporate responsibility, not what they're saying, but what they're actually doing. Change the way we evaluate corporations, change the way corporations evaluate themselves, and require social responsibility in the way corporations operate, the way they used to operate before Reagan came in as president and before the shareholder value movement. I would refocus the agricultural production system on public health. Let's have an agricultural system that provides food for people as well as animals, and certainly not automobiles, and that takes care of workers in the process, please. I would like a very, very strong federal support for regenerative agriculture. Let's reduce the impact of agriculture on climate change, promote triple duty diets, less meat, more plant foods in every way possible, through pricing strategies, through labeling strategies, through educational strategies, everything we can think of. And then a major, major, major federal effort to prevent chronic disease, which is the cause of so much death and disability in our country. I realize this is something over the rainbow, but I think it's important to have these kinds of goals in mind so that when you are working at local level and when you are working in the kinds of work that you are doing, you have those upstream goals firmly in mind and you know that you're headed in that direction. So I think rainbows are useful in that way. I'm an enormous proponent of food advocacy. I think everybody should be doing it and everybody should be doing it right. And there are ways of doing it right. And that means doing it by the book. And there are plenty of books that tell you how to do it. Public policy, public planning and evaluation, all of those things work for this. Just pay attention to what the rules are and follow them. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Well, thank you very much. So we have our agenda before us. Go out and do that stuff. What I'm going to do is open it up for questions. We've got some capacity to handle questions from the folks on the webinar. We'll run the session through 15 after the hour, at which point I will give those of you still seating a chance to leave discreetly. And then we'll have a few minutes afterwards for just mixing about. If I call on you, please say who you are, something to identify which of the companies you work for or are paid by. It's a question, it's mostly to be a question session, not a speech session. So questions should end with question marks and be short. Floor is open. And I'm sorry that I don't know people's names. Right here.
Shout.
Hi.
Sorry, Zoom can't hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for this fascinating talk. My name is Maya. I'm a graduate student here at the Kennedy School. My question for you is if you can say a little bit about counterculture to this more mainstream food, where you see, I don't know, people advocating for raw vegan diets, and how much is that the result of a certain vacuum that was created from public health?
Well, there's always been a counterculture on food, no matter what it is. Food is very personal, and the people have very strong feelings about it. And I don't usually argue with people about what they eat. I don't find that very useful. What I am most interested in is trying to move people's concerns about food from their personal diets to something more political. I want to open up the possibility for heading in an upstream direction in public health terms. I don't know, does upstream, downstream get used in public policy? It's a public health term as far as I know. But I want to see people get involved in politics, get involved in making it possible for healthier diets and healthier eating to be easier for people and to be the default in some ways. I'm not sure that addresses your question, but I don't argue with people about what they eat. If they want to eat vegan diets, that's fine with me. They're certainly healthy if you do them right. And it's not that hard to do them right. So, you know, I'm not quite sure where your question's coming from, I guess.
It's more the popularity of these alternative or counterculture diets as a result of a vacuum in public policy.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there is public policy on nutrition. It says to eat less salt, sugar, and fat. That's the dietary guidelines for Americans. They've said that since 1980. And I would consider that a vacuum. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether the next set of dietary guidelines deal with the ultra-processed foods. They say they're going to. We'll see. But the committee that deals with the dietary guidelines does not write the dietary guidelines. The agencies write the dietary guidelines, which is a big change from the way it used to be. When I was on the dietary guidelines committee, we wrote the guidelines. I'm not saying they were that great, but we wrote them. So I think there is a vacuum. But I'm not sure what your objection is to veganism. I'm not a vegan myself, but I don't object to it. So no objection. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hello, and thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I am Sarthak, and I'm a doctoral student at the School of Public Health. I've worked with Dr. Walter Willett and others there. I absolutely loved the presentation. And I also gave a talk recently at my high school, and those young kids were asking me, like, what is like the new trend in nutrition research? And I said, precision nutrition. So I request you to expand on your views on that, because that's like the thing like everyone's talking about in nutrition. And you had an interesting comment. So if you could please expand
Well,
on
it's
that.
the same issue. It's about personal. It's not about the society. I'm interested in public health. Public health is about populations. It's about making a population healthier. Precision nutrition is about making you healthier. Now, if you can apply precision nutrition to millions and millions of people, then it might have a public health effect. But how much is it going to cost to get genetic analyses of individuals? Are the people who are most at risk of public health nutrition problems going to be able to afford that kind of thing? I mean, I think it has the potential for being very interesting scientifically, and maybe we'll learn something from it that will be possible in making dietary advice for populations. But I'm interested in public health. That's my focus. No, I think it's fine for individuals who are wealthy and educated. For the kinds of populations that I want to help, I don't think it does anything. No. And I think the food and medicine, which is aimed at those populations, is fine, but it's not sustainable. These are prescriptions for fruits and vegetables for poor people who go through the health system. Don't get me started on the healthcare system and whether that's the right place for this or not. But that's how it's been set up. And it too, when I was at the White House conference that was held last fall, I said, what's this stuff about food is medicine? Food's not medicine. Medicine is medicine. What's this about? And they said, oh, it plays very well in Congress. It's fundable. Whereas public health is not fundable.
We'll go another one or two, and then just a collective stream of frustration. One of the things I see is you get into the habit of calling only on one column or one piece of the room. So I'm going to try the first time. Standing up in the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now I realize Molly Taylor Pileski. I'm coming from another part of campus, and I'm an early modern historian. So when I hear food is medicine, I think Galenic medicine before the invention of medicine to treat. But in any case, fascinating talk. And I think it's really refreshing to have a roadmap to solve some of these problems rather than just listing the problems. And one of the aspects that I think is missing is this social cultural aspect. And thinking about changes through the pandemic, when I asked my students at a much less resourced institution than Harvard before this, how many of you eat your meals alone? And 1, 2, 3 meals, about 3/4 of the room ate 3 meals alone a day. And I think that was exacerbated during the pandemic. So if that's a cultural issue, how could public policy address that? Because the ultra processed foods feed into the myth that you got to eat on the go and food is only there to fuel you rather than give you connection with other people. Thank you.
I don't think there's anything harder to deal with than cultural problems. Changing culture, really difficult. But the example that I like to give is gay marriage. Nobody ever thought, or certainly nobody in my generation ever dreamed that gay marriage would be possible. That's a cultural shift. And it happened, I think, because more and more and more people realized that they had gay relatives who they loved, and that, you know, it changed suddenly. I mean, to me, it was an example of cultures can shift. And that means you just keep working on it. You keep working on it. You keep working on it. And you try to show people how nice it is to eat together. You know, I mean, I don't know what you do about those families. I've seen diet records of teenagers that show that they eat 10 times a day. Nothing that would look like a meal, and almost everything that's in a package. And so you try to shift that in any way that you can help it shift. And maybe at some time there'll be a big shift. But you got to keep trying.
Stand up, please. Okay.
Impressive stand.
Thank you. I work on it. Hi, my name is Uday. I'm a graduate student at the Kennedy School, just started studying here. Thank you for that talk. So I've read a lot of stuff about this, and usually there is a lot of talk about eating local and how a lot of the food that we consume is grown in like some part of the world and then packaged in a different part of the world and then is brought here. And that obviously has like consequences on like greenhouse gas emissions and like the environment generally. So like, do you think that besides mostly eating plants, we should also focus on mostly eating local? And if there are, and if so, are there like ways to design public policy to achieve that?
I think locally grown food tastes better. It's fresher. You know, I remember once being in Barrow, Alaska. I'm sorry, I don't know the new Inuit name of it. I can't pronounce it, but I was there and I went to the supermarket and they had blueberries from Patagonia. 12,000 miles difference. You know, it's the whole globe difference. There they were quite expensive. I'm greatly in favor of growing food locally. I think everybody who can grow food should be growing food because it teaches you a lot and it tastes better and it's really fun. I have a terrace in Manhattan. I've got fruit trees on it. It's really, I don't have very much fruit, but it sure is fun. I have 1 peach this year. So I think, you know, I'm greatly in favor of it, but I don't, you know, we live in an interconnected world, and in a way you could say it's good for blueberry farmers in Patagonia to be able to sell blueberries in December. Oh, I didn't mention it was December. In that, so I don't know. I think both, we need both. No, I like local food. I go to farmers markets. I like them. The food's good. And it supports local farmers. That's always a good thing too.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alice. I'm also a grad student here at HKS. I was living in San Francisco before, so you should visit Berkeley Bowl. It's a great grocery store. Yeah.
I actually like the one that's on Solano better.
The Berkeley Bowl West, right?
Not the Berkeley Bowl. The
Oh,
other
okay,
one.
I see.
The other
Monterey
one.
Market,
What's the other
sorry.
one called? Thank you, Monterey Market.
But
I like that one better. It's not quite as overwhelming.
Okay, fair. But my general question was that I think there seems to be conflicting messages about the accessibility of these kinds of like real foods, I guess is the
Mhm.
best way to put it. Like
Mhm.
there's arguments saying that they're often higher priced, others
Mhm.
ones saying that like it's easy, it's actually cheaper if you do like certain tricks or whatever. So given like the pervasiveness too of like food deserts in certain
Mhm.
urban spaces, I'm wondering how can public policy help support make these real foods more accessible to those who are more susceptible to having unhealthy outcomes.
I can think of policies right away that would, first of all, you change the price structure. That's the quickest. One of the things that the food is medicine programs have shown is that if you give people free fruits and vegetables, they'll eat them. What a surprise. What a surprise. They'll eat them if you lower the price and make it easier and make sure people have preparation and cooking equipment and refrigeration and all of those things, they'll do it. That's public policy. Dream up policies. Pricing structures require supermarkets to go into low-income areas. If they want to go into a big fancy area, the rule is you have to have, I can't remember the exact rule, but it's something like you have to have 100,000 people who make $100,000 a year or more within some walkable or half-mile radius in order to put one of these big fancy stores in. They want to put it there. You make sure they put it in some other place as well, and price the foods accordingly and have the quality of the foods. The elitist argument annoys me no end. I don't like the elitist argument. I think poor people have a right to eat good food too. So yeah, public policy. Dream them up. That's your next paper.
Now I'm going to take a question from the video group. This comes from the class course on the great food transformation.
I wish I could take it.
Saha is teaching up in college. The course was assigned professors to turn on the switch. The course was assigned to do one of its early classes watching this lecture. So they've just done that and created
You
a general
had
question.
to watch it? I'm so sorry.
They were thrilled. They wanted to be here in this room, but we suggested that was going to be a problem. Okay, so the question from them is, it's obvious that good food research is not enough since it's being blocked by big food corporations. As a result, we need good policies. Nevertheless, for good policies to come, we need the people to back it. How do you think we can convince the people to support these upstream food policies when their belief of food is so misguided by culture and false information?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. People who are misinformed, you're dealing with belief systems, and then it's like arguing with people who have a belief in a religion that's different from yours. I think that's very difficult. I think you have to continually try to tell what you see as the truth and try to behave in a way so that you have some credibility. And don't tell the truth, don't lie, cite your sources, try to be really careful about citing sources. Join organizations that behave in ethical ways. Keep ethics at the forefront of what you do. I don't say that these things are necessarily easy, but if the easiest way to influence people is to act in a way that's the way you want them to act. And peer pressure is an enormous, enormous force affecting how people eat. If people's peers eat a certain way, they're going to eat a certain way. There's lots of research that shows that. So you behave in a way that you hope other people will behave. I don't know how else to do it. I don't see it as my role to try to change people's thinking. All I can do is tell people how I think. I can't do any more than that. Oh.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Yael. I come from Israel. I'm a graduate student here at HKS. I grow dates in the desert. So I'm the representative of the agriculture
Agriculture.
community. I don't know if anyone else is here, actually is a farmer. So one of the struggles is the agriculture community
Mhm.
that promotes monoculture, and through all the regulation and administration and farm bill and everything. And there's no addressing to circular economy and no addressing to the capitalism that you showed in every level. So it starts with the agriculture. Do you have any ideas about the circular economy and capitalism? How do they join up, starting from the very bottom of agriculture?
Yeah, that's where my comment on my rainbow idea about regenerative agriculture comes from. It's a different way of thinking about agriculture, and it is definitely diverse. It's not monoculture, it's diverse. It includes animals as producing fertilizer. It's done in a way that is always cognizant of the effect of what's being grown on the climate, on the soil, on the water, whatever. It's a huge movement. There are lots of people who are doing it more and more. Very difficult to get government support in the United States. I can't speak for Israel, but I suspect it's just as hard, if not worse. Especially these days. And it's something that I think deserves a phenomenal amount of support. And there are lots of people who are trying to get it into the next farm bill in the United States. Do they have any possibility of doing that? I have no idea. If it does get in, it'll be tokenism. Nothing like what is being, I don't see this farm bill changing, but you keep working toward that. And what I find really impressive, I'm totally convinced that diversified farming is good for the farmer, it's better for workers, it's better for absolutely everybody. And the question is, how do you move in that direction against something where corn and soybeans have taken over entire swaths of the country? Very, very difficult politically, but it's a political problem. So I don't think he could see you. No.
Hi, I'm Yavi. I'm a student at the college.
Up closer to the thing.
We met earlier.
Yes.
Well, so I was wondering, I know you focus on American politics, but like big tobacco, which has now the next big thing is e-cigarettes. They've sort of exported all of, all the cigarette sales to the third world. How can we do we as Americans have like a moral imperative to ensure that the same thing isn't happening in, the developing countries where now ultra processed foods are becoming more and more popular? And like you said, they have an aura of modernism and Westernism and all of that. How can we prevent that?
Yeah, it's very difficult for an American to tell a government in another country what to do. That's unless you own the country in some way. I went to a meeting this spring or this summer at the World Health Organization, and it was a meeting on breastfeeding. But it was really a meeting on how to control the actions of infant formula companies in developing countries. And there were representatives of 100 countries at this meeting. And the entire 3-day meeting was about how to stop the infant formula companies from doing what they were doing. And so the meeting was of mid-level government officials. They tried to get as high government officials as they could, but they got mostly mid-level government officials in those countries. So people in those countries were dealing with the problems in their own country. I think that's an approach that makes a lot of sense. And it was a very exciting meeting. It was incredible to be with 400 people who were all on the same page on what needed to be done. It was very exciting. And so those kinds of things are happening. And I think, you have to figure out how to work with, how to get people within the country to do what what they think needs to be done. You know, one of the tenets of public health and of program planning and evaluation is you go into communities and you work with the communities to get the communities what they want. That's the theory. And to the extent that that's done in practice, it works. It's just not done in practice enough. And I'm certainly not comfortable going into another country and telling them what to do. That just seems not like a useful, not good for me and not good for them. No.
So I'm going to cheat and instead of merely keeping score here, ask one question. This university is moving quite rapidly to ramp up extensively its work in climate, which it sees as centered on energy, but increasingly moving to get land use and agriculture in. You've done a huge amount of study on the subtle and brutal ways in which corporate and self-interested funding, disinformation schemes, and so on undermine science. But I'm wondering, as we try to set our own rules for what kind of corporate support we ought to be accepting in our major new climate initiatives here, what have you learned from your food battles about how we should structure those rules?
Well, I'm not sure they're structurable. And we've talked about this already, so this is in a way an unfair question. But I didn't answer it. Imagine that. I didn't answer it. I didn't answer it. But, you know, I don't think you should take corporate support for this unless the corporations are on your side, unless they want to do something about it. You know, I mean, there is so much evidence that corporations have to please their stockholders. You know, how much more evidence do you need? And now there are emails that show what Exxon and all of these companies did. I mean, it's what you've suspected for decades, but now there's proof, you know, flat out documentary proof that these companies knew that they were contributing to climate change and did everything possible they could to cast doubt on the research, cast doubt on the people who were arguing against what they were doing. Why would you expect it to be any different now? Why? You can't expect it to be different unless you change the way that Wall Street evaluates corporations and requires them to do something. I just can't imagine Exxon suddenly saying, we're going to stop digging oil out. We're going to stop. We're just not going to, we're going to close all of our North Sea, whatever. And we're just going to tell our stockholders tough.
Okay, but if Exxon offers us a professorship and 12 student fellowships in studying the climate problem.
With their name on it.
With their name on it. And let's say randomly chosen food company like Nestle chooses to do the same for a chair in food studies and 10 student fellowships.
Right.
What do we do?
You say no.
We say no, thank you.
Thank you.
That's what Harvard would like.
Oh, you're polite. Yeah, you just say no. You just say no and you explain why. Because it would introduce a conflict of interest that would embarrass Harvard. And if it doesn't embarrass Harvard, there's something wrong with Harvard.
And frankly, all the people who would not have wanted their science to look like that, who are now in the same university as one that is supporting a chair and fellowships named for the corporations. It is a tough set of issues here. It's tougher down the road at MIT, where they already have, they've been much more successful at getting that funding than we have. So they're in an even deeper hole. But when you figure out the next chapter in Just Say No, let me know. But otherwise, I would just like everybody to join me in thanking Marion for fabulous.